Deutschland hat eines der stabilsten Energiesysteme der
Germany
Welt.
has one of the most
Also warum
stable
machen wir dann
energy
heute
systems
ein Programm
worldwide.
zu
So why
Energieversorgungssicherheit?
are we talking
Frage
about
könnte man ja
the
wirklich mal stellen.
security of
Naja, die
European
Antwort
energy
ist, diese
supply
Sache, das
today?
ist
Well, the
kompliziert und
answer
komplizierter,
here
als man
is
manchmal denkt.
it's complicated, and it's even more
Es gibt einmal
complicated than you tend to
nationale
think.
Herausforderungen. Ein Teil
There
davon
are
haben wir gestern
national
schon ausführlich
challenges,
besprochen,
and part of them
aber da hört
we
es ja
discussed
nicht auf.
yesterday
Das wäre
in
ja auch
our
schon genug.
program.
Nein, es
But
gibt ja
this
auch
is
noch
not
andere
all. This would be
externe
sufficient,
Faktoren,
but there are also other
äußere
external
Faktoren und
factors which
Einflüsse auf
need
die
to be taken into
Energieversorgungssicherheit.
account, external influences on
Thomas
our
König
national
hat
energy
gestern im
supply.
Programm des E-World Kickoff,
Thomas
das fand ich
König
ganz eindrücklich,
yesterday in the
zum Beispiel
E-World Kickoff
Verteilungskämpfe
program talked
vorausgesagt.
about
Verteilungskämpfe zwischen verschiedenen Sektoren,
fights for
wohin wird
money
das Geld
between
gehen?
different
Vor allen
industries.
Dingen,
Who will
wenn
get the
Europa
money?
zukünftig
Especially
mehr
if
in seine
Europe
eigene
in the
Verteidigung
future
stecken
has to
möchte und
invest
Geld an
more
anderer
into
Stelle
defense.
wird natürlich aus
Money
diesem
will
Geld, so
be
berichtete
lacking in
so
other
viel
areas. And
dann zum
Thomas
Beispiel
König
für
said
Energiewende.
yesterday, this
Ob sich
money is
das
no
auch
longer
unsere
available, for
anderen
example,
Gäste
for
heute
energy
so teilen,
transition.
werden wir gleich noch erfahren.
Whether our
Aber
other guests
dieses
share
Bild
this view,
zeigt,
we will see
wie
later
sehr auch
on. But this
zukünftig
already
auf
shows
Dinge auf uns
that
zukommen, die
we
die
will
Versorgungssicherheit
meet
vielleicht
further
beeinträchtigen.
challenges in the future that will
Außerdem haben wir jetzt nur noch
also
einen
impact
Angriffskrieg
our
auf die
security of
Ukraine. Es
supply.
gibt auch noch
We still have the
einige Auswirkungen der
war in the
Pandemie. Die einen oder
Ukraine.
anderen werden sich
We
vielleicht noch
have
erinnern.
the
Und
consequences of
beide
the
von diesen
pandemic that you
Dingen,
might
ein
still
Krieg und
remember.
eine Pandemie, haben ja
And both of
verschiedene
this, the war
Dimensionen
of aggression and
aufgezeigt
the
von
pandemic,
eben
showed
Versorgungssicherheit
different
und
aspects
wie
of
wir
security
sie angehen
supply
müssen und
and
was man vielleicht besser
what we
abwägen sollte.
have to do and
Insofern,
where more
Versorgungssicherheit gibt es nicht
guarantees are
umsonst und
required.
die kann jetzt aber eine
Security of
Branche,
supply
eine
does not come
Gesellschaft
for
denn
free. So
gewährleisten?
how can an
Wie sorgen wir auch
industry,
in
how can
Zukunft für ein
society
sicheres
meet the
Energiesystem,
challenges? How do we ensure
dass Sie dann
safe
heute dabei
energy
sind,
systems
zeigt,
in the
wie wichtig
future?
diese Fragen
Your
sind und wie
participation
wichtig die Fragen
today
für die Branche und
shows
für
how
verschiedenste Bereiche auch
relevant these
sind.
topics are for you
Damit
and
ganz
different
herzlich willkommen
areas
zum
of
E-World
the
Kickoff.
energy industry.
Schön, dass Sie dabei
So
sind.
a very warm welcome
Mein Name ist Anne
to
Burs, ich
the
leite den
eWorld
Programmbereich
Kickoff.
der eWorld
I
und ich
am
freue mich
Anne
sehr, wenn wir
Burs.
die
I'm
nächsten
heading the
etwa 2
conference team
Stunden
at
miteinander
eWorld,
verbringen
and
werden.
I'm looking forward to spending around
At
about
eWorld,
2
we also
hours
have
with
quite
you
an
now.
international audience, so allow me to briefly switch into English. You being here shows the importance of energy supply security for all of Europe. So thank you for joining in and welcome to the eWorld Kickoff. My name is Anne. I'm heading the eWorld conference team, and I am very much looking forward to spending the next about 2 hours, I think, with you. So we have prepared a stream, a video in English and in German, so you are welcome to choose whichever works best for you. You can find both links in the chat that is next to this video. So, auch nochmal zur Sicherheit auf Deutsch. Wir machen die
And
Veranstaltung
now
heute
also
auf
for our
Deutsch
German
und auf
guests, we will
Englisch. Sie
have
finden
the
jeweils einen
interview
Link zu dem
today
Stream
in
im Chat
German
der
and
Kollegin
English,
stellt den Link ein.
and you will find the links to the
So, was haben
individual
wir aber heute vor?
chats
Ich
and
lege Ihnen das mal
streams.
kurz auf.
What are we planning to do today? Let me show you the program for today.
Genau, kurzer Kontext. Das eWorld Kickoff
Just
läuft über 3
some
Tage,
background.
genauso wie
The
das
eWorld
Energiemesse.
Kickoff is
Gestern
a
haben
3-day
der
event, similar
Netzbetreiber
to our
Thomas König von E.ON hatte ich ja
live
schon
show
bei
in
Eingangs
February.
erwähnt und gespoilert.
And yesterday we
Und
talked
zusammen mit ihm
about the grid. I
der
already
neuen
mentioned Mr.
Energiewirtschaft, zusammen mit
König,
Klaus
and we
Müller
also had the
haben wir letzte
Association
Woche
of
über
Energy
die
Market
Sicherstellung des
Innovators present, and
Stromausbaus
together
und
with
auch die
Klaus Müller
ausgestoßenen
from the Federal
Netzentgelte war
Network
ein
Agency,
Thema. Das
they
war eine
analyzed
sehr
the situation
angeregte,
around
lebhafte
grid
Diskussion.
expansion and the
Ich fand
pricing
es
of grid
lustig, sehr
fees.
zuzuschauen. Falls
The
Sie es noch nicht
discussions
gesehen
were
haben, ich
quite
empfehle das
heated,
sehr.
and I
Können Sie sich die
recommend
Zeit
to
mal
you
nachschauen.
to
Die
perhaps
Aufzeichnung
check
finden
the
Sie natürlich noch online.
recording if you are interested in this topic.
Morgen, Sie
It's
sehen das hier,
available
schauen wir uns
online.
einen Aspekt der
Tomorrow,
Wärmewende,
as you
nämlich
can
wie sich
see
Wärmewende
here, we will
finanzieren
take a
lässt.
closer look at
Und
heat transition and
auch
how
da
it
ist die
can be
Anmeldung
financed.
natürlich gerne
And here, of
jederzeit
course, you
möglich
can
über die
still
eWorld
register
Community finden Sie das.
using the eWorld community.
Heute steigen wir ein mit einem
Today,
kurzen
we
Impuls
will
zur
start
Resilienz
with a
der
little
Lieferketten.
keynote on
Im
the
Anschluss
resilience of
dann
German
eine
supply
Podiumsdiskussion, die
chains,
nochmal
and
tiefer auf die
then we'll have
energiewirtschaftlichen
a
Aspekte
panel
der
discussion which will take a closer
Resilienz
look at
eingeht.
the energy
Ja,
aspects.
ich denke mal, gegen 11, spätestens halb
Well,
12
and
haben wir dann
Then around 11 or 11:30, we come to a close of today's program, and hopefully we have gained more insights into how to guarantee security of supply. And now also some information. You can, of course, ask questions at any time, and you can use the chat on the eWorld community, and I will take your questions and I will hand them over to the guests. So as you see me in a YouTube stream here, I told you that there is a recording of yesterday. There will also be a recording of today's event. So if you like it, share it with others and recommend it to others. But this should be suffice as a start. Let's now talk about the program. I already spoiled this. The first keynote will come from the think tank EPICO Climate Innovation, and I'm happy to welcome the founder and managing director. A very warm welcome, Dr. Bernd Weber.
Hallo, vielen Dank.
Thank you. Mr. Weber, you studied in Oxford and at the Sciences Po in Paris about climate policies. And why did you found EPICO in 2021?
Man kann natürlich die Frage stellen, und die Frage wurde mir auch ehrlicherweise gestellt, braucht es jetzt noch eine Denkfabrik, die sich im Energie-
Well,
und
I've been
klimapolitischen
asked, do
Bereich
we need another
zunächst mal
think
auch für uns
tank
Berlin und jetzt mittlerweile auch
looking
Brüssel
into
betätigt?
climate
Und wenig
action
überraschend ist meine
in
Antwort
Berlin and now in
damals wie
Brussels as
heute
well?
eindeutig
But
ja.
honestly speaking, my
Wir
answer is
fokussieren sehr
yes,
stark auf
a
das Ziel
clear
der
yes.
Klimaneutralität,
We
wollen
are very
ja
much
tragfähige
focusing
pragmatische
on
Lösungen
climate
bereitstellen, die auch
neutrality and
ja, umsetzbar
viable,
sind und setzen dabei
practical
vor allem auf die Dynamik
solutions
von Markt und
that can be
Innovation und
transposed
eben
into
auch
real
ja, die
life of
Fähigkeit,
the
das dementsprechend auch
markets
in politische Prozesse
and
einzuspielen.
of course can be integrated with political processes. Well, you have brought along two of your papers to give us some insight, and I'm very much looking forward
Ja,
to listening to you
sehr
now.
gerne. Ich würde Ihnen auch gerne
Well,
diese
I'm happy to
Papiere beziehungsweise die
present
Gedanken, die
you
damit verbunden
with
sind,
these
näher bringen,
papers
idealerweise
and
mit
the
einer funktionierenden
considerations
Präsentation. Ich hoffe, Sie
that
können das
go
sehen.
along with them.
Wunderbar.
Hopefully,
Sehr
the
gut.
slideshow will also
Ja,
work
und
and
vielen Dank
everybody can
nochmal,
see.
dass ich hier etwas den Blick weiten darf zu Beginn dieses heutigen
Thank you very
zweiten
much for
Kick-Off-Tages
allowing
und
me
über ein Thema sprechen
to
darf, das ja wirklich eine
give you a
wirtschaftspolitische, aber
broader
Sie
view
haben es
today
gesagt, eigentlich auch eine gesellschaftliche Bedeutung hat, nämlich unsere Resilienz.
and speak
Und das
about
insbesondere in
an
einer
issue
Zeit,
that
wo
is
wir
also
merken,
very
die
important in
geopolitischen
politics and
Spannungen
for our
nehmen zu.
society,
Wir
and
sehen
that
uns
is
natürlich auch
resilience.
mit
Tensions are
Disruptionen in der
increasing,
Wirtschaft allgemein
and
konfrontiert und
of
natürlich
course,
auch
this
der Pfad
is
hin zur
an issue
Transformation der
for
Klimaneutralität,
economy
der
as
hier eine
well
ganz
as
entscheidende Rolle
politics
spielt.
and
Wenn wir
climate
jetzt
neutrality
in
and
Resilienzsysteme
resilience against
reinzoomen,
that
dann
background plays
ist
an
uns
important
natürlich auch, und
role.
auch das wurde im Intro
Now,
angesprochen, noch schmerzlich
looking
bewusst, wie das war bei
into
der
this more
Pandemie und
closely,
natürlich auch die
we
Erfahrung
remember
der
very
ersten
well
Zeitenwende,
how
also die
painful
Zeitenwende,
this
die
was
hervorgerufen wurde durch die
during the
Aggression
pandemic.
Russlands in die
And of
Ukraine
course, at the
entsprechende
first point in
Verwundbarkeiten in
time,
der
that was
Lieferkette
called a
wieder sehr
turning of the
offensichtlich wurden.
times. That was the
Wir
Russian
stehen
invasion
jetzt,
in
und das ist
Ukraine
meine These,
and
vor
the
einer zweiten
disruptions for the
Zeitenwende.
supply chains
Eine
that went
Zeitenwende,
along with
die
all that. I
nicht
think
dadurch
this
begründet wird
is
durch die Wiederwahl
another
von Donald
turn
Trump,
of the times.
der ja schon
It
in seiner
is
ersten Amtszeit
partly characterized
multilaterale
by Donald Trump
Kooperation und
being
gerade auch freier
re-elected during
Märktehandel
his first
in
term in
Frage gestellt
office.
hat und jetzt
He questioned
braucht,
many
um hier
multilateral
quasi die
agreements
üblichen Checks
and
and Balances,
trade
wenn Sie so
structures,
möchten,
and now
mit einer
he
Mehrheit
gets
in beiden Kammern des
back to
Kongresses
power
und
without
auch mit
the
eigentlich
regular
keinem
checks and
nennenswerten
balances, with
Widerstand
a
innerhalb der eigenen
majority in
Partei.
both
Und er hat auch
chambers
schon
of
angekündigt,
Congress,
dass er Zölle
although there is
erhöhen wird, 10
some
bis
resistance
20%,
within his
manche
own
auch noch mal
political
deutlich mehr.
party.
Und das
He
ist
has
natürlich für ein
announced
Land
future
wie
tariffs,
Deutschland, das
10%,
ja auch
20%
von seiner
even, in particular
Handelsoffenheit
with an
lebt und
eye to
dadurch
China.
charakterisiert ist, eine
So for a
besondere
country that is
Herausforderung und
characterized
damit auch
by
ein
being
besonderes
open
Risiko
to
für die
trade,
entsprechenden Lieferketten. Also
this
das ist der
entails
Kontext,
a
über den wir
particular
quasi
risk
über
for
Resilienz sprechen
supply
müssen.
chains.
Ich
So
habe Ihnen
that
jetzt auch
is
zur Genese
the
dessen, was ich Ihnen heute
context
erzählen möchte,
within
zunächst
which
mal
we have to
einen
discuss
ganz kurzen
resilience.
Auszug aus einem bisherigen Papier
And
von
I
uns
have
mitgebracht,
brought
das sich
for
spezifisch,
you
das war
an
nach dem Ende der
excerpt
ersten
from
Zeitenwende,
a specific paper that looks into energy resilience after the first turning of the times, in particular looking into the question of how we can reinforce our own energy sector without dependence on Russian gas and in general. And we tried purposefully with our analyses to go beyond these questions and look at how primary energy needs can be met sustainably beyond the short term. And we included questions like sufficient supply with the right materials, availability of the right technologies. We looked at this from 3 different angles, or rather there are 3 different dimensions. One is future compatible markets, in particular flexibilities and capacities, and how to deal with regulation that needs to be dealt with more quickly than innovation-oriented regulation and what we call the regulatory sandboxes that act as kind of speedboats and financial incentives, tax reliefs, public guarantees, digressive grants, etc. We discussed this with Franziska Brandner from the Green Party, among other politicians, Bettina Stark-Wachsinger with the Liberal Party, and many other political actors were involved in these considerations. And I can confirm that there is a lot of understanding among politicians that this is an important field of action, not just for corporations, but also for politicians. Now, what am I going to do today? I would like to exclusively give you some insight into a second study that is based on the first and taking things even further, looking into resilience of German supply chains in times of changes. And we conducted a survey together with IW Cologne. More than 1,000 German companies from trade, from metal production, manufacturing industries, mechanical engineering, and many others were surveyed. And of course, the results have been weighted by us to render them as representative as possible for the German economy. And then we will, of course, give some ideas as to what can be derived, what can be concluded from these results. As I said, this is exclusive. It's a preview. The study has not yet been published. Now, looking at this whole topic, the first question is, what is resilience all about? I will not go into the academic details of a definition because there is not one exact definition of resilience, but I would like to summarize the following. We believe it is of particular relevance to distinguish between dynamic and static resilience. Static meaning that you have the ability in the moment of shock to keep the system up and running. Particularly times like the pandemic or energy crisis showed that Germany was rather resilient, statically speaking, and this of course relates to the public funds, the budget, debt situation, etc. And dynamic resilience refers to your ability to come back after a disruption. And here the next question is, has Germany been able to do just that with an eye to competitiveness, economic locations, attractiveness? Keep in mind what Draghi reported and the negative trend that is a result of their analysis. So there is not just one specific definition of resilience, and there is not just one specific measure to be taken to improve resilience, and I will try to elaborate on that. This is really a bundle of measures to be taken by companies and corporations as much as governmental players, public authorities, etc. And these should be logically derived. First, the survey was looking into measures to be taken by entrepreneurial entities. And you can see on the right-hand side different categories: monitoring, diversification, buffering. And of course, this includes production detail, production technologies that might be changed. And of course, the biggest change imaginable is a relocation of procurement, sourcing from other countries, countries that might be closer in politics, might be more reliable, what is called friend shoring, might be geographically nearer, that is nearshoring, or that could be insourcing or inshoring, that is sourcing inside their own country. And the first results have already been very interesting, I think. The first question is, how much do we depend on other countries, on supplies from outside Germany? And that was the first surprise. Less than 40% say that we source from abroad, and we're very much dependent on that. I would have thought this was more. Of course, there are some distinctions to be made. Usually the dependence is bigger for large corporations. It's usually larger for manufacturing industries. That's why we have more than 50% for these two categories. And of course, there are comparable studies, like a survey that was conducted in North Rhine-Westphalia, where you can see that the perceived dependence has even gone down. 50% were of that opinion last year in North Rhine-Westphalia. And again, these results have been weighted. It's 12% less, however, this year. So maybe it's a question of perception. How much do we depend on others? Maybe it's a question of actual measures that have been taken to reduce dependence. Now look at those companies that feel dependent on foreign countries and specifically look towards China. The dependence on China is only relevant for 40%. Some say a lot, some say a little, but what you see in the pie charts is the perception of those companies that feel they depend upon China. And then we drilled a bit deeper and asked for measures that are planned to be taken, that have already been taken, or that seem non-relevant, for instance. And you can see the color coding. Red means a measure has already been implemented. Blue means it is scheduled. Green means no, it is not playing a role. Bright blue means we don't know, and purple is not relevant for us. Now, if you go beyond monitoring and take action, more than 50% potentially want to source from new suppliers, have maybe already identified alternative sources, and about 1/3 are thinking about sourcing from new countries, other countries than before. We also asked about just-in-time production and stocks, whether inventories are to be increased. About 30% say they have already taken action, 10% have scheduled some measures. So that is typical, really, for economic players. And interesting in my eyes, that's the second bar, the electrification of production. One of the beacons in industry after the crisis we have seen in the economy and always highlighted by us as a think tank is only relevant for a small fraction of companies. Only 5% have implemented measures in terms of electrification, and very few plan to do so. So that's really a very small share only. A potential explanation is that these things take time. On the other hand, I think there is a strong correlation with the cost of energy. We will get back to that later. And maybe it is simply not attractive enough at the moment to electrify, even if it were possible. And the last potential measure we asked about relocating sources of supplies, and the highest frequency is more than 1/3 to of companies who want to or have already relocated to geopolitically more reliable countries. And then we have the specific question about China once more. That is the last line, the bottom line here. And it asks about reducing the volume of precursor materials sourced from China. And you can see that China is remaining an important factor. And this is about those companies who say, yes, we do depend on China. So China will remain a very important supplier of precursor goods and materials. Now, having focused on economic activities, we then looked into political measures for the economy in order to increase resilience. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide the different measures. More than 50% deemed all measures important, or rather important, but two are very much emphasized. It's infrastructure and securing domestic production through lower prices of energy. These were deemed important by more than 80%. Of course, there are some more specifics for individual industries, but I don't want to go into the details here. Generally speaking, the assessment that you get here doesn't depend on the size of the company or the specific industry. And of course, this is an identification of measures that will have to be considered by the next federal government in Germany. And this takes me to the very interesting question of what the political recommendations may be after this analysis. Obviously, the government should support strategies by companies to secure their resilience. How can they do that? First, we should look at improving entrepreneurial parameters. If you are confronted by several crises and your competitiveness goes down as a company, it is really difficult to become more resilient, in particular if this is one of your priorities, but not necessarily the number one priority. So this is about typical locational factors like reducing bureaucracy, taxes and levies, education, reliability of our path to becoming climate neutral is also important. And what comes out of our talks is also that this is not always just about discussing objectives like being climate neutral. This is an obvious goal, but a discussion about objectives leads to uncertainty. We should rather discuss what can be done also in the short term.
hat die Regierung natürlich Möglichkeiten,
But then, of
betriebliche
course, the
Strategien,
state, the government, also has the possibility to take measures, to take economic and political measures, which are not influencing things to a very great extent. And I only would like to pick out two of the list that I have mentioned here. First of all, infrastructure for energy and transport, and also reducing costs. And this will, of course, be the question of the electricity grids, hydrogen grids, the carbon infrastructure. These are enormous costs, which are also reflected in the increasing grid tariffs. And this leads me to the important question of the financing of the transformation and the architecture to be selected. So how can be grid fees frozen for a period, for a certain period of time? Would this be a possibility? And then we could also talk about guarantees, tax subsidies in order to stimulate the market. The electricity market design, of course, also is of high importance, and the panel discussion will focus on this. I was member of the platform for the climate neutral electricity market design. A lot of discussions, but not many decisions. But we have to ask, what will be the expansion of the market be? Will we have a capacity market? What about the power plant strategy, which is first put back a little bit, but will this be on the agenda of the new government? And will there be really measures, or is this a topic which is only discussed? So we have to make sure that these topics are taken up in the next legislative period. And now I would like to ask you to look at the last point on this chart, and this is the most difficult and controversial area, and this is the development of strategic areas, strategic sectors, and this is very strongly linked to the question of the so-called renewables pool, as we say in science, whether the production and the manufacturing industry follows the lower costs of renewables. But this will result in many difficult political discussions and attempts to provide answers. This needs to be a structured approach. In Germany, we have the situation that we have very high energy costs, but also a high share of renewable energies. And the big question will be, what are the areas that we still want to keep in Germany in spite of all these problems, and avoid a relocation into another country? And if you want to keep industry here, what are the possibilities? These are all difficult questions, and politicians understandably have avoided these questions so far a little bit, but these questions need to be discussed. And this leads me to the last two charts. First of all, the question that I would like to ask: do we need more state intervention to provide more resilience? And how can it be justified? What are the criteria that we can use for the state either to get active or not to get active? And first of all, in our survey, we saw that a great number of companies wants to take measures to reduce the dependency on foreign countries, but others do not. This is also due, of course, to their value chains. The factor of time is very important. And of course, China is playing a major role as a procurement country, as a sourcing country with quality and price. But now the big question is, will this result in market problems for companies? companies that do not lower their dependencies as much as others. And here, this is a question which is very much prominent in the energy sector and leads us to a trilemma. We cannot efficiently introduce energy transition, provide safe energy, and reduce dependence on China at the same time. So we need trade-offs, and these trade-offs need to be focused upon. Not always do we have to take action, but in some areas it is urgently required to take actions, and we have to lead political discussions about this. Let me try and be a little bit more concrete, and this is my last chart now. First of all, we've got the objective to achieve economic resilience in a cost-efficient way, and this has to do a lot with strategic autonomy and economic security. But the question of state intervention or a reasonable industrial policy can be based on 3 guidelines. This is our suggestion. To first look at concrete products. And the first question is, how critical is the degree of dependence in the supply chain? Secondly, is there a business case for production in Germany? Or should we avoid this? But this will not be easy in the long run. And will a diversified friendshoring be useful? So to relocate production to friendly states in our neighborhood. And this needs to be discussed for individual product groups. Just to give you an example, solar energy, yes, of course, we've got a high dependence on China, but how critical is this degree of dependence? Perhaps not as critical as for semiconductors, which are a major precursor for other products. And even if the influx of solar modules from China would immediately be stopped, we still have a problem. And regarding the question whether we have a business case in Germany, I think the answer would be negative for Germany. It's probably a difficult industry for Germany, and it doesn't make much sense. On the other hand, we've got green hydrogen, and there is not such a strong dependence from China yet, and not a strong business case, perhaps not in Germany, but within the internal market in Europe, in the North Sea area, or also in Southern Europe, where we do have possibilities for friendshoring to tap into new potentials without endangering our industrial policies. Well, I think these 3 questions might help us in a more general debate that we need regarding supply chains in companies and the current status in Germany to get a better structure. And I hope that I could give you a little input in today's discussion and some more intensive discussions in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Ja, vielen Dank. Und ich kann mir auch gut vorstellen, dass wir
Thank you.
einige von den Punkten vielleicht noch
I
mal
can imagine that some of these points will be taken up again in the following panel discussion. But let me ask you one question. In your study, you very much focused on Germany, and this was the question you were asked. But can you also use the insights you have shared to other countries in Europe, to Europe in general? Is this possible, or would this be too difficult? Yes, of course, it would be possible to transfer this to Europe in general. Germany, as the largest industrial nation in Europe, which is open for trade, has a special role in Europe. But basically, what we have analyzed for Germany will also apply to the European Union as such. And this is why after the energy crisis, the discussion was triggered at a European level. With the Net Zero Industries Act, we also see measures by the European Union, the ramp up of certain areas which are deemed strategic. We see this for strategic resources, for example, and these are definitely the right ways that we have to go. Also, trade policies are at the end of the day, a European topic, and so Europe is the right level. But at the same time, we have to say that Germany is playing a major role because of its special vulnerabilities, but also because of its economic power and its exposition towards China. This is something that we also see quite clearly. Also regarding the automotive crisis and what we triggered at a European level regarding electrification, for example, did not always work. The reality check sometimes shows that there is still a lot of need for action. We are only at the start of the discussions, both at a federal level and also at a European level. Oh, thank you. And the paper that will be published soon will, of course, make a contribution to these discussions based on the information and the insights that you granted us. And now a last question. Can you tell us roughly when the paper would be published? It will definitely be published within the year. So this year. The survey was completed and we are now trying to find out what we can derive for the next federal government. And we see a lot of movement right now and we want to come to the right conclusions, but we look forward to then publish this paper and have a broader discussion. So you are promising us a Christmas present. Yes, exactly. You have something to read over Christmas. Okay, thank you. I will, of course, keep my eyes open and I look forward to this paper. Thank you very much for your time, for sharing your views and for presenting the draft study. Thank you for coming. Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity for this exchange. And now I wish you a good panel discussion and I hope that we can continue our contact. Yes, thank you very much. And we will also continue soon. We will be here in a few minutes. And in the meantime, we show you some insight, some information about the next e-world.
Hallo und ganz herzlich willkommen zurück hier bei uns im Essener Studio. Wie angekündigt haben wir ein wenig
Welcome to
umgebaut
our
und ich bin
studio here in
nicht mehr,
Essen.
beziehungsweise ich war gerade auch
As
nicht alleine, aber jetzt habe ich noch
announced,
mehr
we have
Gesellschaft.
reshuffled our
Es ist
studio a
wunderbar, dass
bit,
Sie bei
and
diesem
once more, I'm
Keynote-Kickoff
not
dabei sind.
alone
Ich
here.
freue
It's
mich schon
great to
sehr
have
auf die
all of you here,
E-World-Präsenzmesse.
and I'm
Vielleicht gibt es
looking
Ihnen ja
forward
jetzt auch so,
very
nachdem
much
Sie
to
die
our
Bilder gesehen haben, die wir
on-site
für Sie nochmal
event,
zusammengestellt haben.
eWorld Trade Fair, which you
Gerade
might
vor
be
der
even
Umbaupause
more
haben
enticed
wir
to
von
visit,
Dr. Bernd Weber von
having
Unipo
seen the
gehört,
video.
wie es um die
Before the
Lieferketten
break, we
nach
listened to
Deutschland
Dr. Bernd
bestellt ist und die
Weber
Widerstandsfähigkeit
about
ist. Er hat auch die
resilience
Frage
in the
aufgeworfen, wie
energy
es
sector in
vielleicht zukünftig um
Germany.
tiefere
And I
Staatseingriffe geht, um
also
das Ganze ein
asked
bisschen
about
resilienter aufzustellen.
potential interference
Sicherlich ein
from
Punkt, der mit auf
the
die Liste kommt,
government
der
to
vielen Dinge,
increase
die
resilience. And
viele
I'm
Menschen
sure
wünschen
this
von
is
einer
one of
sehr
the
wahrscheinlich bald bestehenden
items on
Bundeswehr.
a very long agenda for a potentially
Das bringt mich auch zu
soon
unserer
to
nächsten
be mandated
Diskussionsrunde zu dem
new
Plan, den
federal
Sie jetzt
government. And this
vorhaben.
takes us now to our next
Da werden sicherlich
panel.
auch nochmal die ein oder anderen
And what we want to
Fragen und
discuss
Punkte
here,
aufgeworfen, auf die
I'm
Liste
sure
gesetzt, was
some
wir
additional
wünschen als
items will
Branche
be
von
added to
der
the
europäischen, aber auch von
agenda
der deutschen
that
Politik.
our industry
Bevor wir
wishes
da rein einsteigen,
for
freue ich mich
German and
sehr,
international
jetzt Ihnen
politicians
die heutige
to
Moderatorin der
be
Diskussionsrunde vorstellen darf.
prioritized or at least
Sie ist
focused
Chief
on.
Operating
And that's why
Officer
I'm so
des
happy
Europäischen
to
Verbands
introduce to
Energy
you our
Traders
host for the next
Europe.
panel
Sie ist heute
discussion,
aus
Chief
Brüssel
Operating
zugeschaltet.
Officer of the
Ganz herzlich
Association of
willkommen, liebe
European Energy
Barbara Lem.
Traders, Energy
Ganz
Traders
herzlichen Dank, Frau Wallace.
Europe,
Ich freue mich sehr,
and
dabei zu
joining
sein.
us from Brussels.
Schön, dass
Hi,
Sie da
I'm
sind.
happy to be
Haben
here.
Sie persönlich was auf der
We're
Liste, was Sie
glad
sich
to
wünschen
have
von
you.
der
Is
neuen
there anything
Bundesregierung?
on
Oder
your
sind Sie traurig
personal
über irgendein
agenda
bestimmtes
that you
Projekt,
would
was
like
jetzt
the federal
nicht mehr
government
durch den
to
Bundestag kommt?
tackle, or are you
Manchmal denke
sad
ich,
that
es ist
some
die
things will
täglich größte
no longer
Murmeltier.
be
Wir verschieben und
um,
verschieben und verschieben schon seit
handled?
fast 10 Jahren.
Well,
Und
sometimes it feels
das
like
ist jetzt schon traurig
Groundhog
für uns.
Day. We
Wir
seem to
wünschen,
be
dass alles
delaying
ein bisschen schneller
things
geht nach
and
dem
have been doing
23.
so for
Februar,
10 years.
aber
I
wir sind
think
realistisch.
we just need some acceleration, maybe as of
Verschieben wir
23rd of
uns gleich
February, but
weiter,
I'm
um
a
Ihre Worte
realist.
aufzugreifen. Ich bin sehr
So
gespannt, was die drei
there
Herren
is delay,
wünschen
but
und dann
we must not
wünschen von
delay.
mir oder
And
Ideen
I'm really
mitbringen, wie wir
looking
in
forward to our
Zukunft
three
Sicherheit für Deutschland und
guests
Europa
and
schaffen.
what they will say to the
Dann
effect.
übernehme ich an dieser Stelle.
All
Herzlichen
right,
Dank noch einmal.
so I'm taking over
Und wie
as
Frau Bull
host
schon
for the
gesagt
panel
hat, wir sind
discussion.
nicht
Thank you very
alleine
much. As
hier.
Anne Burs
Und
said, we are
ich habe
not alone
sozusagen
here
3
in
Herren
the
mitgebracht, die mit
studio.
mir hier auf dem
I'm
virtuellen
accompanied
Panel
by
sitzen.
3
Und ich
gentlemen
möchte Sie kurz der
for the
Reihenfolge,
virtual
der
panel
alphabetischen
discussion,
Reihenfolge
and
nach
I would like
vorstellen.
to
Als
introduce them to
allererstes
you
begrüße ich ganz
in
herzlich
alphabetical
Sven Becker.
order.
Sven Becker
First,
ist
Sven
Geschäftsführer der
Becker,
Trianel, mittlerweile seit
General
19
Manager
Jahren.
of
Und
Trianel. He has
eins
been in that
verbindet uns. Die
position for
Trianel ist damals
19
am 8.
years.
Juni
And
1999
on
gegründet
8th of
worden. Das
June
ist mehr oder
1999,
weniger exakt
Trianel
der
was
Tag,
founded.
an dem
That's
EFET
more or less
gegründet
exactly
wurde.
the same
Also
day
der
when
Verband, für den ich
EFAT,
arbeite. Wir sind
the
umbenannt worden
association
in
I'm
Energy
working
Traders
for,
Europe,
at European
aber
level
eben
was
vormals EFET.
founded.
So
So
gesehen
that is
waren wir
Energy
beide
Traders Europe,
hintergebunden und mit
but the
dabei.
formal acronym
Die
is
Trianel hat ja Europa
EFET. So
eigentlich
that was
quasi mit in
more
der
or less
DNA,
our
wenn man
same
da nochmal
birthday,
reinschaut,
and it's
wurde sie
in
gegründet
our
von 4 kommunalen
blood
Unternehmen und unter
to
anderem waren
look
da auch die
into
Stadtwerke
these
Maastricht
issues we
dabei,
are
nicht
discussing
nur die
here. Among
Aachener
other
und die
things,
Viersener.
the
Und
public utilities, not just from
deswegen
Aachen
bin
and
ich
Viersen, but
immer
also
wieder, wenn
from
ich auf dieses
Maastricht,
Unternehmen
were
schaue, weil
on
es wirklich von
board
Anfang an den
from the very
europäischen
beginning.
Binnenmarkt betrachtet hat.
And
Sven Becker
your
hat
company was also
Stationen bei
looking
der
at the
Hochgas, der
European
Enron
single market from the very
sowie bei der
beginning. He
Stadtkraftfeuer
was
gehabt und wie gesagt, seit
also
19
with
Jahren
other
führt er
energy
erfolgreich dieses
market
Unternehmen,
players
was man auch
before
von Matthias König sagen
leading
kann.
Trianel into the
Herzlich
next
willkommen an dieser
century. And the
Stelle.
same is
Sie
true more or
sind
less for the
seit
career of
24 Jahren bei
Matthias
der
König.
Enertrack tätig,
He's been
seit
with Enertrack for
2005 bereits im
24
Vorstand.
years. Since 2004,
Die
you're a
Enertrack
member of
auch
the
ganz
executive
klein
board.
gestartet in der schönen
Enertrack also
Uckermark
started
damals
out
und hat
very
mittlerweile
small in the
1800 Megawatt
Uckermark
installierte
region,
Anlagenleistung,
1,800
davon allein
megawatts
950
installed
eigene Windanlagen,
capacities,
über 1100
950
Mitarbeiterinnen und Mitarbeiter.
proprietary
Also das
wind parks, more
sieht
than
wirklich aus
1,000
nach einer
members of
Erfolgsstory
staff
in der
currently. So that is
Energiewirtschaft.
really a success
Und
story
ich
in
bin
the
froh, dass Sie dabei
energy
sind.
sector.
Herzlich
I'm
willkommen.
happy to have you here with
Und
us.
zu guter
Welcome,
Letzt Dr. Dennis
Matthias
Rentschmidt.
König.
Wir
And
kennen uns
last but not
schon
least,
seit
Dr.
längerer
Dennis
Zeit
Rentschmidt. We've
aus
known each other
dem
for quite some time from this merry-go-round of associations in Berlin since 2021. Dennis is General Manager of the VDMA, the Association of German Plant Makers and Machinery Manufacturers, and he knows very well what it means to try and reconcile conflicting interests. And this is quite an uncertain situation at the moment when we look to Germany and analyze the security of supplies, and that's also very important during this time. As I'm the only woman on the panel, I would like to start with one initial question and will again go by alphabetical order, starting with Sven Becker. The power plant strategy has been suspended. Germany has suffered for years from the waste of time when it comes to security of supplies. Are you ready to go once the Power Plant Security Act is approved? Generally speaking, the market is offering enough opportunities for investments in flexibilities which are very much needed for renewable energies to be integrated and for a synchronization of generation and consumption. If we cannot integrate renewables, the energy transition will fail. Apart from that, I'm personally convinced that hydrogen-ready gas capacities have to be made available in the long run. And of course, we need a successful exit from coal-fired power generation. Like many other companies, we have known for a long time what to do to be ready. We are ready. We are ready to invest. But when the renewables have been integrated and get subsidies outside the market, and there is a zero feed-in fee, you have no improvement at all. I know of no one who's going to be ready to invest without some kind of security for power plant capacities. For the past 10 years, we've been discussing the introduction of a capacity market. We started in 2013, 2014 with different ideas, different models for the introduction of such a capacity model. Politicians said we don't need that. They went for EOM 2.0. The result is well known. No new power plants were built. That's why we need to do the catching up now. It was obvious after the three-party coalition took office in 2021, and you've said it, another 3 years were lost, and it wasn't possible for a capacity market model to be introduced according to the English or the Belgian role model, or to introduce a power plant strategy. Now the three-party coalition is a thing of the past, and we will have a snap election. We still fear a delay of 1.5 years. The energy transition, which we're all in favor of, will again be delayed. Thank you very much for this first assessment. Matthias König, in June, you got the electrolyzer project for the Eastern Corridor in Germany subsidized, and I think that was good news. You have been benefiting from green hydrogen for quite some time. So do you really care whether the Power Plant Security Act is approved this year, next year, or the year after? And when you look at all the different projects, no matter which political parties will form the next federal government. Will they continue the project? Well, we do care. When I talk to producers of electrolyzers, they always tell me they all talk about hydrogen, and we want to produce hydrogen, and we don't get orders placed with us. You have said it, there is a lot of subsidizing, but there has also been a lot of delays. First, you needed an instrument, a subsidy as an instrument, or rather a set of instruments. Now it is all put in place. We could get started, but the manufacturers of electrolyzers have been waiting for orders for years. Now there are some automation approaches. We believe that among the electrolyzer manufacturers, similar to PV manufacturers, need more cost efficiency. So they all work only once they know they will get grants and subsidies. They believe prices will go down, and without public support, they will be out of the market soon. And the other issue is there is no big demand for hydrogen at the moment. If Trienal is not building the hydrogen-based power plant, who will need hydrogen? Of course, we need all the technologies for hydrogen-ready power plants, but if the demand is not there, we cannot go forward. So we have to build. We have 10 gigawatts at the moment, which is really good, and that's also praise for Minister Habeck, because he really made sure that the approvals and licenses were accelerated. So we've been successful to that extent, but now it's all about practical implementation. There is something they always call the combined power plant. How can we secure supply? We believe that we need a combination with PV, and the grid connection points have to be officially viable. If we have 100 megawatts and 30 to 40 on top of that for PV, we have to have the possibility of connection, and the feed-in points have to allow for this combination. And then we won't have the strong fluctuation of the grid. We will save money. We won't need such a lot of infrastructural additions, and we will increase the quality of the power market. We don't have this one-on-one generation and consumption at the moment. There are many times where we produce more electricity than is used up, and that leads to a dilemma, in particular in the summer months when you have peak times at midday. You see the effect on the prices. We generate too much electricity, and this superfluous electricity has to be made useful through batteries that we can add through relocation of location, or from one location to another, depending on where the sun is shining. But this is only be possible with batteries on a short-term basis. For a long-term basis, we need electrolyzers. And it's also important that the large amount of energy is viable in the form of hydrogen. Hydrogen that is not just useful for fuel cells or in terms of electricity, but also for heating and for industrial purposes. And I remember what Mr. Weber said earlier, reality checks and reliability. The demand for hydrogen will not necessarily go up that much. And last but not least, in particular in the winter months, there will be some peak times with strong winds when it's no longer economically efficient to buffer the peak times with electrolyzers. And we think it will be easiest to have power to heat units where whole communities, municipalities can be provided with power from wind. We have tried this already in a small pilot project in a village. 160 people live there, and only by replacing the redispatch with a 1,000 cubic meters hydrogen, we were able to provide heating for the small village. And we have to be more flexible. We have to allow ourselves more freedoms when it comes to the connection point with the grid. All this cutting off is the wrong way. We have to allow for benefits.
Thank you, Mr. König. So in these first drafts of the ministry, there are still a lot of aspects which have not been taken into account sufficiently. If I take a look at the combined power plants, for example. But now, Mr. Rentschmidt, Dennis, I would like to quote you. You said in February, now it is important to see whether the expectations of the investors will be fulfilled with the power plant strategy. And the promise to define the power plant strategy by summer 2024 and implement it by 2028 is central. Well, we already discussed this, and you are now talking on behalf of mechanical engineers. How do you see the current situation? If the law, if the act will come as was outlined in the first documents, will this be helpful, or will this again need more adjustments and fine-tuning? Well, I do not know whether this will totally fail. You have to make a distinction between the content and the processes. From the content point of view, I think we are now taking a first step into the right direction, which I described in February. But a lot was said already. Mr. Becker and Mr. König already mentioned a few points that we can fully share as mechanical engineers. From a process point of view, things will change and will probably fail because of the failure of the government. A year ago or 1.5 years ago, we wanted to be ready with the power plant strategy already. This was announced, but then it took much longer for various reasons, and now probably it won't come. And this would be very, very bad because we would have to accept further delays. And we do not know yet what the new federal government will do. We know that the Christian Democrats do not want to change course completely regarding the capacity market. This was at least to be heard. But will you continue what was prepared so far? Will they do something completely new? And Mr. Habeck, and I understand this, is still of the opinion that he can still get the law up and running with the current government, and we would be in favor of that. So on the positive side, it's good to deal with this topic. Mr. Becker already said 10 years ago, and I was involved in the discussions, the federal government came to a different conclusion, and it now took 10 years in order to change the mindset among politicians and in the Ministry for Economic Affairs. And now there was a new result, and people said, yes, we do want to create a market mechanism which guarantees supply. Well, now there are various segments in this draft, and Barbara, you asked, does it help to fill the green gap? There are various aspects you have to take into account, and the ministry also has various arguments. On the one hand, they are talking about security of supply. On the other hand, they are talking about decarbonization. So we are looking at gas-fired power plants, which should provide support if there is no wind and no sun. And there is the area of hydrogen-ready power plants, which will help decarbonize our economy and which were also negotiated in Brussels regarding notification. So in a nutshell, from a content point of view, everything is fine. Something good was started, but now we have to finish this. And this leads me to the processes. Now we should waste as little time as possible. We should implement things as quickly as possible. And now the acting people who have made the progress in the past 3 years hopefully will still be around in the future. It would be helpful because then the processes would be a little faster and we would not see so many interruptions.
Dennis, du hast das nächste Stichwort schon genannt. Brüssel ist da
You
natürlich
just
auch ein
mentioned
entscheidender Faktor.
the
Ich selbst
buzzword
in
Brussels
Brüssel
will be an
und
important
blicke
factor
natürlich
here.
auch auf
I
die
am in
vergangenen
Brussels
2 Wochen
today,
und
and I, of
darauf,
course, look
aber
back to
habe
the last
insbesondere
2
halt auch die
weeks,
Anhörung der
not
delegierten
only,
Kommissare
but
und
I
Kommissarinnen
looked at
angehört.
the
Im
hearing
Europaparlament
of
kommt dann
the
diese Woche noch die Entscheidung,
designated
wie das Ganze
commissioners,
halt ausgehen
and
wird, wer
the European
akzeptiert wird,
Parliament
wer
will
nicht.
take the decision in
Und
this
vieles ist
week,
auch dort
who will be
angesprochen
accepted
worden.
and who will not. And
Initiativen,
many of the
mögliche
aspects were also
Gesetzgebungspakete,
mentioned
um die
here.
Versorgungssicherheit
Initiatives,
europaweit
possible
zu
new
verbessern.
legislation in order to
Aber, und
improve
das ist,
security
glaube ich, wirklich
of
der
supply
Fokus
in
dieser
Europe.
kommenden Kommission,
But,
nicht nur
and
an den Green Deal zu denken,
now
sondern wirklich
the Commission should not
das
only think about the
Kapital
Green Deal,
freizusetzen und
but should also
Erleichterungen zu
make
schaffen, dass
funds
auch wirklich noch möglich
available
ist, der
and
Wechsel zu einem
provide
integrierten,
pave the way
CO2-neutralen
for a
Energieversorgungssystem ermöglicht wird.
CO2 neutral
Jetzt ist
energy
die
supply
Frage an Sie alle
system.
drei. Was versprechen
Now,
Sie
a
sich von der
question to
neuen
all three
Kommission?
of you.
Muss da
What
auch noch
do
mal
you
Impuls
expect from
aus
the new
Brüssel
Commission?
spezieller Art
Will
kommen, dass
there
das
be
in Deutschland
a new impetus from
dann auch vielleicht noch mal
Brussels
einen Schub bekommt?
that will
Jetzt ganz immer
also push
unabhängig davon, wie
Germany
die
a
Zeit
little
für
ahead,
die Verabschiedung
irrespective
einer möglichen
of
Kraftwerkstrategie und eines
the
Kapazitätsmixes
timeline for a
aussehen?
possible power
Gibt es Ihnen
plant
eine Wunschliste,
strategy
die
and
Sie
a
sich
capacity
abrufbar machen?
market? Do you have a wish list because Christmas is coming?
Feuerfrei, wer möchte zuerst? Sonst frage
You
ich
can
nachher.
go ahead. Who
Sie haben es ja schon gesagt, Frau
volunteers?
Lem. Wir bräuchten
Mrs.
ein
Lim, you
integriertes
already said what we need is
CO2-neutrales
an
Energiesystem.
integrated
Und dieses
carbon
Integrierte sehe
neutral
ich bisher
energy
nicht.
system.
Vielleicht sollten wir das
And
nochmal
the
abschichten. Wir haben
integration
einerseits
part
den
is something I
Strommarkt,
am
der
missing.
eben
Well, on the
eine
one hand, we have the
einsame
electricity
Nationalraumwerke ist,
market, which
die
is
halt alle
made up
unterschiedliche
of many national markets, and
Erzeugungssysteme
all
haben.
these
Das sind, wir
national
haben sehr
markets have
viel Wasserkraft,
different
in Frankreich sehr viel
generation.
Kernkraft,
In
Deutschland eben sehr
Scandinavia,
fossil geprägt,
hydropower, in
auch mit unterschiedlichen
France, nuclear
Verbrauchsstrukturen und
power, in
unterschiedlichen, gerade
Germany,
auch wiederum der
fossil
erneuerbaren
power,
unterschiedlichen
and also
ja,
different
Wettersituation. Ja. Da ist es
weather,
total wichtig, dass
weather
wir
situations
ein
in different
integriertes,
parts of
vermischtes
Europe.
System
And here
kriegen.
it is necessary
Das
that we
heißt,
have an integrated,
Kuppelstellenausbau
intermeshed
und
system so
dann
that we've got
einen
transfer
integrierten
points at the
europäischen Energiemarkt zu
borders
fördern.
and
Ich
an
meine, das, was wir
integrated
in der
European energy
Binnenmarktinitiative in
market.
den 80er Jahren
So what we saw
vollendet
in the
wollten,
single market
das haben
initiative
wir im
in the
Energiemarkt weiter nicht geschafft.
1980s
Stattdessen
is
haben wir
something that did not
Kleinstaaterei
reach out
mit
to the energy
einem
market.
Kapazitätsmarkt in
We still
Belgien und
have many
Großbritannien, aber
small
keinem in
markets, a capacity
Deutschland, ja,
market
und das
in
auch nach
Belgium and in the
unterschiedlichen Modellen.
Netherlands, but
Das
not
ist
in
also
Germany,
auf
and
der
the models are
Stromseite. Da
also
müssten wir
different
ein Level
in all the
Playing Field
countries.
schaffen und
So
eine
on the electricity
europäische
side, we should
Kupferfabrik.
have a level
Ähm,
playing
Wenn wir
field
aber
for
mal auf die
everybody.
Molekülseite gucken, also in den
But if you take a look
Wärmebereich,
at the molecules, at
dann
the heat
sind
market,
wir da ja
then
Nettoimporteur
we
als
are a net
Europa. Und da bräuchten
importer
wir
in
eine
Europe,
gemeinschaftliche
and we
europäische
would need a
Importstrategie, auch mit
joint
Blick auf das
European
Thema
import
Versorgungssicherheit
strategy,
und
also
Resilienz.
regarding the
Auch
topics of
da
security
gibt es
of
eben
supply and
wiederum
resilience.
viele
So here again,
Nationalismen und
we
wir
have a
haben es ja
lot
auch
of
gesehen im Rahmen der
national approaches,
Ukraine-Krise,
and
dass
we
da hier
also
was nicht
saw this in the
vorangegangen
context
ist
of the
und
Ukraine crisis.
seine
Everybody is doing
LNG-Kapazitäten ausgebaut
what
hat
they
und wir
want to
da
do.
auch dort nicht
Everybody
sehr
was
europäisch
expanding
gedacht haben.
LNG
Insofern
capacities, but there was no
wäre mein Wunsch,
European
dass wir
approach.
ein ganzheitliches
And it would
europäisches
be
System
my
hinkriegen.
wish to think more in European terms, to have a holistic approach in Germany, I still see Brussels as far away from the rest of the market. So I'm still very critical of Brussels. And on the national level, we are not really dealing enough with the realities that a lot of decisions are now taken in Brussels. Brussels is setting the scene, and we as national industries or in the national political field, we should much more try to influence Brussels in order to generate an energy system that is in line with our values, saying decarbonization and security of a supply are of utmost importance. Thank you for this strong statement. Mr. Koenig, you've got the approval in your hands and you are, of course, interested in Europe. But what is your wish list for the new Commission? Well, Sven Becker already mentioned a number of the important points, but from a German point of view, I just have to say we should not make the same mistake again that we made with gas. There we had a high dependence on foreign markets, especially Russia, and this is a mistake that we should not repeat. In Europe, I think we are all friendly states and we are a good network, so we should see ourselves as Europeans. And so the electricity market and the transfer point at the borders should be expanded. We should have a better electricity trade within Europe, because this will give us more flexibility. In some country, we always have wind, and this means that we would need fewer reserve power plants. But nevertheless, if the energy forecasts are right for Germany, we will be an importer of energy in the future, especially regarding hydrogen. And this is why we need a trans-European hydrogen pipeline. We just need this system to use the sun in Spain to produce hydrogen and transport it to Germany. This is a single market that we have to create and increase very quickly. But then many national interests come in, and then many projects that were planned fail because of national interests. So I would be happy if the European single market would be strengthened. The brakes would have to be stopped here, so we would have to accelerate, no longer step on the brake. But for electrolyzers, we now have a transitional period until 2027, and you are only allowed to use the existing plants now and then only new plants. Why? Because we are giving up a lot of flexibility. Just because some official says we want to promote the expansion of renewable energies, we should focus on the end point and say, yes, we want to have a security of supply based on renewable energies. And we already lost too much time. We now have to accelerate, and we have to make sure that we reach this goal. We should not really lose sight of this goal, and we should be unbureaucratic in our approach to accelerate things. Unbureaucratic. Well, yes, but this is something that is difficult in the German DNA, but you can still hope. So, Mr. Koenig, you are not afraid to be dependent on imports from other countries, that we are a net importer in the long run? No, I am not afraid of this. This was also part of our strategy. If you take a look at the market 2045, it was clearly defined that we will be a 30% importer, so that we would import 30% of our energy. And this doesn't worry me, because other countries just have other natural resources which are much better. In South Africa, for example, PV plants can produce much more, 3,000 hours compared to 1,000 hours in Germany. And this is a win-win situation if we then also push states which had an economic disadvantage in in the past. Dennis, in your position, you are of course also traveling quite a lot, and you have a special view of what has been discussed. So
I'm
the
sure you
Danish
have a
commissioner,
very
for
clear
example,
view of what is going to happen at the European level, with an eye also to the designated Danish Energy Commissioner. So, what is your view? A lot has been said already to that effect, which I'm fully in agreement with, but there's also this aspect of hardware and the orientation we would like to have in Europe. Mr. Weber said a lot about resilience. There are many aspects which are currently very high on the agenda because a lot is happening here. And we see in Europe that other regions of the world create new players in the field, in new technologies from China or driven by the Inflation Reduction Act from the United States of America. And with the logic of the Green Deal and the Industrial Deal, with the logic of these deals, the EU, of course, tries to counteract these new competitors. But the big question is, in how far can we translate this to a practical level? And we don't want a patchwork solution. Besides everything we already heard about the market, we must not forget the hardware situation. For machinery, we need economies of scale. For wind turbines, for gas-fired power plants. If every market has very specific requirements, be it technical requirements or political requirements, us, the manufacturers, are under a lot of pressure because of all these different specifications. So a harmonized approach at the European level across the borders of the individual member states is a benefit to everyone because it allows for more efficiency also when we look at the hardware, the machinery. I rather have a wish list not at the European but at the German level, whether it is a problem of currently not being able to invest in power plants or the solid financing that is still being needed for renewable energies. I think at the moment it's a lot at the national level that needs to be done. I hope you will be able to hear me. This is a maneuver fire alarm, which is not an actual fire, but still a disruptive noise. I try to get back to the power plant strategy. You already said there are many different challenges for plant makers, and Dr. Weber talked a lot about the dependence on China when it comes to precursors. The member states are ready to go. What is the biggest fear when we look at the power plant strategy and the pertaining ideas? Well, I'm happy to comment on that. The member states don't fear anything, and the members are ready to go. The players in the market are ready and will be ready to deliver. The challenge is rather an international one, not just for gas-fired power plants, but also for wind turbine, for example. At the moment, with the plants, we don't want to get into the same crisis we saw with PV. 10, 15 years ago, we were a leading player in the PV industry, and then we gave almost all our capacities over to China or lost them to China. 95% come from China now. And this was not politically intended, but it was a political decision that led to the situation which we now have because they didn't keep an eye on a level playing field and fair competition. And that is now the big challenge. in Europe, in Germany, how can we make sure that critical infrastructure like energy supply for Germany and Europe remains secure and safe from attacks also from outside Europe? And this means we have to make sure that nobody can intervene from outside. How can this be made sure? It can be made sure when we introduce security aspects of security policy, which can be anchored by regulation for the whole of Europe, and a level playing field has to be established for trade, for commerce, so that Chinese and other manufacturers from regions outside of Europe who do not comply with the WTO or with directives, or who interfere with our regulations for pricing or subsidies, they have to be kept from entering the market. We are not against competition. Competition is good for innovation, it's good for efficiency, but competition has to be conducted fairly. And if there are others in the same playing field for whom completely different conditions apply, this is not fair. And as I said before, critical infrastructure needs to be protected also from influences from outside Europe. And now we have lost our hostess. Yes, she is getting to safety, which is obviously more important. Thank you very much for now. From the viewpoint of a manufacturer, Mr. Becker, Mr. König, of course, you do need the components for your different plants. Do you feel this influence? Sure, when we look to the secured power plant capacities and the building of gas-fired power plants, we don't see a national competition. What we see is an international competition. There is Asia, there is the Middle East, there is even Latin America. They are ordering power plant capacities, and then there is a handful only of internationally competitive providers. So we are planning a power plant of our own at the moment, and we have seen that this is a big challenge to secure the capacities for plant building. We have been able to do it, but it was quite a challenge. And the report published in January 2023 by the Federal Network Agency that required more than 20 gigawatts of hydrogen-ready gas-fired power plant capacities in order to exit from coal by 2030, more than 20 gigawatts. This report has marked a kind of threshold. If we need about 5 years to build a power plant, we should start building next year to be there in 2030. I don't know what politicians think. Do they believe that the 20 gigawatts will be there within these 5 years? I think a maximum of an additional 4 GW will be possible. That would be at least 8 large blocks. That's approximately 4 nuclear power plants. We need the plant making capacities. We need the plant engineers. We need the grid connections. We need the investors. And then let's say 4 gigawatts per year. That means 20 within 5 years. Because of the power plant strategy, that we will have to wait for another 1.5 years till the middle of 2026 because the three-party coalition has collapsed. I think the Power Plant Security Act is no longer it will not come to pass before the snap election. There will be no invitation to tender. So we have a political reorientation after the election. There will be a new federal government, and they will only just get started before the summer break. But the Power Plant Security Act will not be the first thing on their agenda. And if we have a more conservative government in Germany, the current three-party coalition bill will probably not be their starting point, because this was developed without involving one of the larger opposition parties. So there will be a start from scratch, more or less. And then the Power Plant Security Act will maybe be approved end of next year, if we are lucky. And then the approval will take another 6 months. So the invitation to tender will only happen in the middle of 2026. Then it takes another 5 years for the power plant to be up and running. That is 2023 for the first 5 gigawatts. Now, remaining within the same logic, 5 gigawatts only every year, it will take us till it will take till 2035, maybe a bit earlier if we don't need the full 20 because we have a more flexible demand situation or better battery storage capacities. So there is some flexibility, but from my viewpoint, it would be a good idea for the government to establish a capacity market as soon as possible, which is open to all technologies or different technologies, and where different solutions can be compete with each other in order to secure capacities. Going back to the initial question, yes, we do feel quite some tension in plant making, and we are not living on an island here. This is an international competition that is happening around us and accessing the capacities. I would like to point out that there are also different components. Let's take transformers. After the war in Ukraine, there is such a scarcity in Europe. If we want the energy transition to happen quickly, we will not be able to do without Chinese transformers. They can still deliver. Many companies have a delivery period of up to 3 years. This component, this hardware is so specific, and there wasn't such a lot of demand in the past 10 years. But we often see another danger. The first offshore wind park in Germany is built with Chinese components. And when I talk to operators in Vietnam or South Africa, they already give up because they cannot compete with the Chinese prices. I was in China at the beginning of the year, and there are some Chinese manufacturers who, to a certain extent, have overtaken us. There are electrolyzers with fully automated manufacturing and production lines, and we may have a bit of a competitive edge there. When it comes to wind power, the European market is very much fragmented. When you talk onshore and not offshore, our project sizes are rather low, and we have market entry barriers. We need certifications. It's a question of financing. So it would be a good thing for the European industry to get supported. For instance, if the funds from the Reconstruction Loan Corporation are made available only to European players. But the pressure has increased a lot, and we have to increase efficiency.
Dankeschön, Herr König. Hier auch noch nochmal an das Publikum, sofern Fragen gestellt werden möchten, kann dies jederzeit erfolgen. Wir nehmen das gerne mit auf und geben das dann weiter an unsere Panelisten. Eine Sache habe ich noch. Nun ist ja natürlich viel über Wasserstoff gesprochen worden und eigentlich schwang so mit, es wird immer ausreichend geben, zumindest das, was dann halt in diesen Anlagen dann
You
auch
talked a lot about hydrogen already and about what is required, but all this, of course, also leads to some difficulties. In recent weeks, we have heard a lot that some of the projects will not be built. There were some insolvencies regarding green hydrogen production. And yesterday, ESA, the European Regulation Authority, published the first hydrogen monitoring report. And here again, we are seeing a lot of disappointment. The goals for 2020-30 will not be reached if you scale up, because there is simply not enough demand on the one hand in the industrial side, and because the cost differences are so high, and then we have some restrictions in the build-up of electrolyzers. So 100 megawatt and more by 2030 doesn't seem to be possible. Too little has been installed. Now we've got the pipelines, 42,000 kilometers would be required once around the globe, but only for 1% do we have final investment decisions. So in a nutshell, everything is really very difficult. And the question here is, what is your expectation? Will the volumes that are mentioned in the hydrogen strategy be possible at a certain point in time? We now are saying that the first power plants have to be retrofitted in 8 years. But what needs to happen in order for this to be possible? Are there one or two obstacles which might be tackled? And can we do something? Probably it's the cost side. This is the answer that I expect. But what are your views? And perhaps we can start with Mr. Rentschmidt. Dennis, you definitely also thought about it. Yes, there are always two points of view. There is a question of the hen and the egg. Do we still need the demand, or do we first need the demand, or do we first need the supply? I can't give you a solution or an answer, but I know that the Christian Democratic Union wants to have a green gas quota for the next legislative period, and this could create a certain pull if you have the obligation to mix in a certain amount of green gases or green hydrogen. I can only talk for the power plant operators or manufacturers. We said that all turbines and generators will be made available hydrogen ready. And this is a commitment which is not recent, it's quite old, and we still promise that we can deliver. And in many cases, we can already deliver hydrogen-ready components, and the year 2030 more or less refers to the entire product portfolio. And it is possible already in many areas. There are turbines which can burn 100% of hydrogen today. And the hardware, the machinery, the equipment will not be the bottleneck. The difficulty is rather the question, how can we get enough green hydrogen into the system? And this leads me directly to Mr. Koenig. Yes, the hen and the egg. I see it the other way around. I think there will be enough production of hydrogen if the demand is ready. because many of the developers in the renewable energies area are small companies, and we do need financing. And financing is only possible if you have a safe market. So the 8 years hydrogen ready are absolutely important. This is existential for us in order to create a working hydrogen market. And alternatively, this could also be a solution. We now have a scenario where we have hydrogen corridors, we have certain hydrogen lines which are planned. So why don't you just have an act on the feed-in of hydrogen where all the operators and the developers can be sure that their investments are safe? Otherwise, we cannot cut the Gordian knot. We need a safe demand and safe prices, secured prices in order to be able to build electrolyzers. So I really plead for having an act for hydrogen. A green gas quota is going in the similar direction. But there you are back to the question, how can I get a contract as an electrolyzer operator? There is still a gap which needs to be closed, and I think it would be a simple and fast and flexible solution if we had a feed-in law for hydrogen. Thank you. Mr. Becker. Yes, thank you very much. Well, the supply of H2-ready gas-fired power plants, here I'm not quite sure whether we will build up a large base of electrolyzers in Germany in the long run, because the import costs connected to performing hydrogen core net integrated into the European network, so Belgium and United Kingdom, where hydrogen, France, of course, where hydrogen could be delivered, that we then have enough volumes available. 20 megawatt electrolyzer, we are planning one at our Hamm site. We also have the approval and we are ready to go. But as Matthias König already mentioned, there is no demand. And also industrial customers are very reserved. There is a high insecurity, uncertainty in the industry based on the volatile framework conditions. But with a 20 megawatt electrolyzer, we could perhaps also supply heat to villages, but we would never be able to supply to a 500 megawatt gas-fired power plant. There we would need higher volumes. Either we have a cost degression for electrolyzers in Germany and combine them then with the low-cost energy prices from renewable energies that are available at some hours of the day, or we have to look at imports again, that we get hydrogen from countries where the electrolyzer capacity would be much cheaper. And one more comment, which might also fit into what Mr. König said, a feed-in law for hydrogen. It's a good idea. We always agree, don't we, Matthias? But we have to be careful that this would not be perpetuated, because with the entire industry, we are really depending too much on state regulations and rules. And I hope that on the 23rd of February, we have general elections in Germany, and this is quite exciting, because 10 days before that, we can discuss at eWorld what will happen on the 23rd of February. So this is really a decisive time for Germany. Whether we will get even more directions from the state, intervention from the state, when you can feed in what energy which technology to use, or whether we can go back to more liberal markets, and where the market cannot do this, for example, for carbon, then we just have carbon certificates to counteract these developments. But for PV, yes, there were too many subsidies, and we, of course, also profited, but the state is always quite slow in defining laws, slower than the market. And I think state failure is always bigger than market failure. And from my point of view, we should get back to more market. We should have market whenever possible, and the state should only intervene where necessary. But if you talk about our industry in recent years, people just say, well, you have to support this, you have to subsidize that, because the market mechanisms no longer work.
Das ist ein schönes Schlusswort. Ich verzichte angesichts der Zeit darauf,
this is
noch einmal mit
a
einer
wonderful statement right at the end. I do not want to ask another question to the panelists any longer. I think we can say that regarding security of supply and hydrogen, Germany would be lost without Europe, and also at an international level. We need import flows, and it is necessary to have a trans-border cooperation, and we should also learn from other countries. And we, of course, have to speed up processes. And the panel was quite hesitant in view of the political situation in Germany right now. I would like to thank you very much for your time, for your clarity, for your explanations. And I now hand back to Mrs. Boers, and I would like to apologize at this point for the fire alarm that we had, unfortunately, and I hope that it did not interrupt your discussion too much. Thank you very much.
Ganz herzlichen Dank. Ich denke, wir können festhalten, dass auch unter widrigen Bedingungen die Möglichkeit für Gespräche bleibt.
I think we may conclude that even under difficult circumstances, we are ready to continue our work. There was the fire alarm in Brussels. For us here in Essen, when I came to the office this morning, there were barricades on the streets because an old World War bomb had been found and had to be cleared. So we are very much looking forward to continuing this resilient work, attitude and mentality, and to meeting again, of course, at On-Site eWorld. Although it's not during the carnival season. Yes, it is going to be during the carnival season. On a Tuesday, starting at 5 p.m., please come to our booth. We will have a carnival party. Oh, sorry, I have really confused the dates here. So I'm sorry for all those who are looking forward to Carnival at eWorld, and we will take you up on the invitation. Now, let me thank everybody for joining us today, and thank everybody who has taken part in the panel for sharing your views, your experiences, your expertise, obviously, and I hope that we all meet again at the latest the next year. And I would like to thank everybody who worked behind the scenes here, our live stream team, our technicians, and the two wonderful interpreters. Tomorrow we will meet again here online. That is day 3 and the last day of our virtual eWorld kickoff, and we will talk about financing with a particular view to the heating systems transition. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you back here tomorrow at 9:30. Again, you can register and log in.